Welcome to Criminal Conversations, where your hosts will take you through some of the most fascinating crime stories in under 20 minutes. If you're looking for a quick and engaging deep dive into the world of true crime, you've come to the right place.
Welcome back to Criminal Conversations. Sometimes we dive into a case and it's just like, ugh, staring into a storm drain,
Right.
murky, unpleasant, but ultimately you just kind of see the bottom. The Susan Powell case, this one's something else.
Yeah.
It's less storm drain, more like, Bermuda Triangle.
Oh, wow.
You've got missing person reports, family statements, even some pretty unsettling journal entries. And to be honest with you, the sheer amount of info here is, well, overwhelming.
Right.
But that's what we do, right? We try to chart a course through it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what makes this case so fascinating, right? It starts with this very simple question. Where is Susan Powell? But you start digging and it's like every answer just leads to more questions.
Yeah.
It becomes less about finding Susan and more about trying to understand this family that seems completely warped by secrets and really disturbing deceptions.
So where do we even begin with a story like this? It's December 2009, West Valley City, Utah. Typical family, on the surface anyway. Susan and Josh Powell. Two young boys, Charlie and Braden.
Yeah, just your average family.
Living their lives.
And that's just the thing, right? On paper, totally normal, active in their church community, no history of violence or anything like that, the kind of family that just blends right in. But as we now know, that picture-perfect image, well, it hid some really, really disturbing things.
Okay, so walk us through it. What was the catalyst? What happened that takes this family from ordinary to the center of a national missing persons case?
It all kind of falls apart on December 6th. Susan doesn't show up for work, no answer on her cell, nobody can get a hold of her, and immediately people are worried. Because Susan, she just wasn't the type to just disappear, especially with two young kids at home.
And this is where Josh Powell, the husband, enters the picture, right? With a story that seems, I don't know about you, but to me just seems sus right off the bat.
Right. By the time the police get involved, Josh and the boys, they're gone. And Josh, he claims that they went on this spontaneous camping trip in December in the snow with toddlers.
Okay, hold on. Even I, with zero camping experience, know that's a little, let's say, unusual. It just screams hiding something.
Absolutely. Major red flag right there. And keep in mind, at this point, nobody knows about all the other messed up stuff going on with the Powells. This weird camping trip, this is just the tip of a very, very large iceberg.
Right. So police are thinking, okay, this story's fishy. What happens next? Do they find anything at the house?
So they do a welfare check at the Powells' home. And let me tell you, the scene is way more staged crime scene than, oh, honey, where'd you put my keys? We're talking a suspiciously clean, wet spot on the carpet, fans blowing on it like someone's trying to dry something, but also Susan's purse, her ID, all just sitting there.
It's like it's too perfect, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Like someone's trying way too hard to make it look like she just walked out.
So on top of all this, Josh isn't exactly winning any Husband of the Year awards with how he acts.
Not even close. I mean, his story about the camping trip, it changes every time he tells it. Plus, he keeps saying these weird things to the police, these comments that just make you wonder if he's trying to sound innocent or he's just really bad at lying.
Like, what kind of comments are we talking about? What's he saying?
It's more like his whole demeanor, Most people, their wife goes missing, they're frantic, calling everyone they know, searching high and low. Josh is busy lawyering up like he's already planning his defense.
Yeah, you got to figure the investigators are like, okay, this guy knows more than he's letting on. But did they have anything concrete at that point? Anything to tie him to Susan's disappearance?
Well, they did find traces of Susan's blood at the house.
Okay, that's not good.
Not good at all. And get this. Remember those life insurance policies Josh took out on Susan?
Oh, boy. Yeah, for what, $1 million?
Try $1.5 million per policy.
Talk about motive. It's like he wanted her gone.
Yeah.
So it seems like things are pointing towards Josh, but not enough to arrest him, right?
Yeah. And this is where it takes a turn. Instead of sticking around while the police are looking into him, Josh packs up the boys and moves to Washington State to live with his father, Stephen Powell.
Okay, now hold up, because this is where things get really strange. Even for a case like this, we got to talk about Stephen Powell, the father-in-law, right? What can you tell us about him?
Let's just say Stephen Powell was, he was something else. We'll get into the specifics later, but his journals, some later confessions, they paint a picture of a man obsessed with Susan. and not in a good way.
This whole time, Susan's missing, and her father-in-law is what, harboring feelings. Man, this is messed up.
Oh, it gets way more messed up. Remember how I said that camping trip was just the tip of the iceberg? Well, as they dig deeper into the Powell family, things get much, much darker.
You've definitely got my attention, but we're going to have to pause it there. We'll be back in a flash to unpack the next layer of this crazy story. So, last we left off, Josh Powell had moved in with his dad, Stephen, in Washington. And you mentioned something about this obsession with Susan. What did you mean? How does it play into all of this?
Well, the police searched Stephen's home, and let me tell you, what they found was seriously disturbing.
Like, what did they find?
Home videos, photographs, journals, and they were all fixated on Susan.
Okay, so not like, oh, she's such a sweet daughter-in-law kind of
No, no, no. Definitely not.
Ugh, that's really creepy. What about Josh? Was he aware of any of this?
That is the million-dollar question. It's hard to believe he was totally in the dark. Some even suggest, and this is where it gets really interesting, that there was this whole other layer to everything. A toxic mix of jealousy, resentment, maybe even a factor in Susan's disappearance.
So we've got a potentially dangerous husband, a creepy father-in-law, and Susan's still out there somewhere.
Yeah.
What about her family? Did they know about any of this?
Keep in mind, while all this is going on, Susan's family is conducting their own investigation. They're convinced Josh is involved, and they're doing everything they can to find Susan. Can you imagine finding out all of this about Stephen on top of everything else?
It's just awful. Did authorities in Washington do anything about Stephen? I mean, what he was doing, it was clearly stalking, at the very least.
And that's where the legal stuff gets tricky, because at this point, there's nothing directly linking Josh to a crime. So the focus is finding Susan. And this whole thing with Stephen, as disturbing as it is, it doesn't answer that question.
But they can't just ignore it, right?
They didn't.
Yeah.
Eventually, Stephen was charged with possession of child pornography, images unrelated to Susan, but disturbing nonetheless, and he was incarcerated.
So, a little bit of justice, maybe. But Susan's sons, Charlie and Braden, they were with Josh this whole time. What was their life like? Stuck in the middle of all of this.
Those poor boys became pawns in all of this. I mean, put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
Your dad's the prime suspect in your mom's disappearance, and your grandpa is a convicted sex offender.
It's just heartbreaking. Did anyone think about those boys?
There was a huge custody battle between Josh and Susan's parents. Social workers, they were involved trying to figure out what was best for those boys, make sure they were okay.
You have to wonder what they saw, what they heard.
It's disturbing. There are recordings of Charlie, the older boy, talking to social workers. And what he says, it's chilling. He talks about his mom being at a campground, and he draws these pictures that suggest something really terrible happened to her.
It's like he knew, but he was just a kid.
He was trying to tell them. And that's the truly tragic part of all this. Even if we never know exactly what happened that night in December, we know Charlie and Braden lost their mother. We know they were probably manipulated and traumatized by her father, and ultimately, they became victims too.
This is heavy stuff. And I know we're about to get to the hardest part of this whole thing. It's almost too much to even talk about.
It is, but it's important. Because February 5th, 2012, it changed everything. I think for a lot of people, it solidified Josh Powell's capacity for evil.
That was the supervised visit, the day Josh Powell killed himself and his sons.
A social worker brought Charlie and Braden to Josh's house, it was a rental, for this court-ordered visit. And as they were going inside, Josh slams the door in the social worker's face, locks her out.
Oh, God, what happened? I can't even imagine the panic.
Seconds after that door slammed, the house exploded, engulfed in flames. Josh and his sons were killed instantly.
How could someone do that? To their own kids, it's just pure evil.
The investigation confirmed what we all pretty much already knew. Josh planned it. He'd soaked the house in gasoline, and right before, he sent out emails. Suicide notes, basically, blaming everyone but himself.
He wanted to control the story, even in death. It's sickening. But the biggest question remains unanswered. What happened to Susan? Did he take that secret with him?
It's possible. But even with Josh gone, the search for Susan didn't end. Investigators, they wanted answers too.
We'll be right back to dig into the theories surrounding Susan's disappearance and where the case stands today. It's almost impossible to process, you know? Those poor boys, they never stood a chance with him as their father. But even with all that horror, we're still left with Susan. What happened to her? Did he take those answers to the grave?
He might have, but the investigators, they weren't giving up. The search for Susan continued, even with Josh gone. There was always that hope, maybe, just maybe, they could still find out what happened to her.
So, I mean, you've worked on a lot of these cases. When the most likely suspect is gone, where do you even start?
It's a race against time, you know? Every minute that passes, it gets harder to find those answers. Investigators, they went back to the beginning. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, hoping something, anything, might jump out at them.
What about that rental car? The one Josh had. Did they ever figure out where he went on that trip?
They did. 800 miles. And
Yeah,
a lot of it pretty remote areas.
do they think he could have, used that drive to get rid of Susan's body?
It's definitely something they looked into. I mean, Utah, it's a big state. Lots of open land, mine shafts, places where you could make something disappear.
And with all the time that had passed, what are the chances of ever finding anything?
Slim to none, unfortunately. That's the hardest part of these cases. Sometimes, no matter how hard you look, those answers, they're just gone. There were searches, tons of them, over the years. Some focused on places Josh was known to go, others based on new tips, new information, but nothing concrete ever turned up.
It's so unfair. To Susan, to her family, they deserve answers. Were there ever any other theories about what happened to Susan, aside from, Josh getting rid of the body during that trip?
There were always rumors, whispers. Some people thought other family members might have been involved. Others focused on those prison visits between Josh and his dad, wondering what they talked about. But nothing ever panned out. No real evidence.
It's almost like the desert swallowed her up, swallowed up the truth.
So where does the case stand officially today?
Officially, Susan Powell is still a missing person. West Valley City PD, they closed their active investigation back in 2013. But they've always maintained if any credible information comes to light, they'll reopen it in a heartbeat.
So there's still hope. It's a long shot, but it's there. What about Susan's family? How are they doing after all this?
They're incredible, honestly. They turned their grief, their anger into action. They started the Susan Cox Powell Foundation to try and help other families in similar situations, to make sure Susan's story isn't forgotten.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, even in the face of unimaginable loss, there can still be light. The strength of the human spirit, it's really something.
It is. Well, this case, it's a tough one. It reminds us that sometimes the most disturbing mysteries aren't the ones with the big twists or shocking reveals. It's the ones that leave you with this lingering sense of what if, what might have been. Susan Powell, those boys,
Yeah.
they deserve so much better. And while we may never have all the answers, we can honor their memory, keep their story alive. Maybe, just maybe, someone out there listening to this right now knows something that could help bring closure to this family, something that finally brings Susan home. If you're out there and you know something, anything at all, please say something.
You're right. You just never know who's listening, what small detail they might be holding on to. Don't stay silent.
This case, it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in ending domestic violence. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, please reach out for help. There are resources available, people who care, and you don't have to go through this alone.
That's a powerful message. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it. We can work towards a future where stories like Susan's, they're not just tragic headlines, but catalysts for change.
Thank you for joining us for another Criminal Conversation. We'll be back soon with a new case, a new story, and a new conversation. Until then, stay safe out there.
Thanks for listening to Criminal Conversations. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to rate and review. It makes a huge difference and really helps us out. All of the sources used for today's episode can be found in the show notes. Join us every Monday and Thursday for a new story and another criminal conversation.